This is Chapter 7, Lifespan Development. This is staying with the preparatory standard competency, and you guys have to understand at least the baseline of lifespan development. I think it's no secret that humans develop throughout their lives, but at every stage, there's some basic characteristics that people have that we should have knowledge of, or at least a basic understanding of, because this could change how you end up approaching patient care. As far as neonates go and infants, neonates are teeny tiny little babies. That's age birth to 1 month. Infants start 1 month to 1 year. They grow super fast. For this age group, the leading cause of death is congenital abnormalities. So we hear a lot of talk about SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. That's not the leading cause by any means. It's a congenital defect that they were born with that their little bodies just can't handle. As far as vital signs, at birth, their pulse rate should be anywhere from 90 to 180. Respiratory rate is 30 to 60, so significantly higher than that of an adult. However, once they kind of get established with being born, they have some physiologic changes that occur very quickly after birth. They're going to slow down to 160 for the top, and the respiratory rate slows to about 50 for the top. By that year mark, they're going to slow down even more, the top being 30. So they're getting a little bit closer to adult, but still, not quite there. As far as blood pressure goes, blood pressure is going to be significantly lower than what you think. So for a neonate, that average systolic blood pressure is 50 to 70 millimeters of mercury. And then as they start progressing, it's up to 70 to 95 for a range, kind of depending on their weight and how they're growing. Blood pressure is typically going to increase with their weight as they get older, but that's pretty low for, as an adult. We would be very concerned about a 50 or a 70 systolic blood pressure. Infants have significantly less blood volume than adults do, and they really don't need all the pressure because they're short. It doesn't really have to work that hard to get down to their feet. So it's kind of where that comes from. Most neonates weigh somewhere between 6 and 8 pounds when they're born, excuse me. Obviously, we hear instances where babies weigh less than a pound. That's usually severe prematurity, or they can go all the way up to 10 pounds or more. Those are definitely outliers in this. The average is that 6 to 8. When they're born, their head actually accounts for 25% of their body weight. So big old heads compared to the rest of their body. That's why when we are taking care of a newborn baby, we throw a hat on their head. They have a lot of surface area on their head, and that's one of the big places that we lose body heat. So we go ahead and put a hat on them to help bring their temperature up. After about week 2, infants grow at a rate of about an ounce per day, and then they end up doubling their weight by 4 to 6 months. They triple it by the end of their first year. Babies actually lose weight most of the time when they go from hospital to home. Neonates are born with a lot of water, and because they're getting hydration from mom, well, when they're trying to figure out how to eat in that first couple of days, it takes them a little bit to figure it out, and they're super tired as well because now they're not getting all of their energy from mom. So they tend to lose a little bit, but they gain it back super quickly. At birth, the neonate is wholly dependent on mom and then has to figure it out for themselves. So when they take that first big breath, a bunch of physiologic changes go on within their body so that they can do everything themselves rather than relying on mom anymore. For the pulmonary system, infants younger than 6 months are particularly prone to nasal congestion, and babies are predominantly nose breathers. They have to be able to suckle on a bottle or breastfeed in order to obviously stay alive and eat. And so they breathe a lot through their nose. When that becomes congested, they tend to have a hard time keeping their oxygen saturation up. So it's very important to do good suction on those noses for those babies so that they can breathe better. The rib cage of infants is significantly softer. It hasn't formed true bone yet in order to facilitate birth itself. For the most part, babies stay very, very flexible. Their skull is actually in 4 different pieces, and it doesn't fuse together until well after they're born, so that their head can kind of cone up to get out of the birth canal. This is why babies are what we call belly breathers. They significantly have movement on their abdomen as they're breathing because they predominantly use their diaphragm to breathe. They don't have that rigid rib cage that helps create a vacuum. They don't have a lot of muscle tone within their rib cage, and remember, those help elevate the rib cage away to facilitate more air rushing into the lungs. They don't have that. So they really have to rely on that diaphragm to breathe normally. Infants have proportionately larger tongues and shorter, narrow airways in comparison with older children and definitely in comparison with adults. So airway obstruction is more common in infants. Positioning babies is very important when we're worried about the pulmonary system. So think about it this way. Think about an adult or an older child being one of those big, thick straws that you get when you buy like the commemorative cup somewhere at the fair, wherever you go. They have that big, rigid straw that has all of the rings on it. And you can pretty much bend that around normally, like not trying to break it, but you can bend it back and forth and it won't actually kink off. There is still some room in the center for liquid and or air to go through. Now think of a baby as the regular drinking straw that everybody has. Now don't talk about the flexible part, but the other part. If you bend it just a little bit, what does it do? It kinks off and now you can't drink anything out of that straw. That's kind of what an infant is. You have to find that natural, stable place kind of in the middle so that their airway is open and their tongue is pulled away, but you're not bending it so far that it actually kinks off because they haven't formed those cartilaginous rings around their trachea like everybody else has. The other thing is when you're ventilating an infant, their lungs are very small and they're very fragile. You can actually pop a lung in an infant by giving air too forcefully or by giving too much air. This is called barotrauma. If you were to take a really, really, really deep breath right now, when you get to the end of that, you kind of feel that burn in your body's urge to breathe out. That's what prevents adults and older children from having that barotrauma. Our lungs feel that stretch and they go, oh no, we're done. And they start squeezing back and fighting against you to try and exhale. Babies don't have that reflex at all. So if you're bagging them like crazy, you're going to have a pretty good chance of hurting them. Respiratory problems can very quickly become life-threatening in infants. If they're struggling to breathe, they don't have a lot of muscle tone. They don't have a lot of reserves that allow their muscles to keep working for a long time, and so they will get very tired very quickly. They will get overheated, they will become dehydrated, and kids, when they get dehydrated, their heart freaks out and they can actually go into cardiac arrest from dehydration. That's why in the winter, so many little babies get hospitalized when they're mildly ill, because if they're dehydrated, that can be very, very significant for them. For the nervous system, the evolution is crazy after birth. Babies start out with a lot of just reflexes. They're not thinking about what's going on, they just do it. And a lot of this comes from just bouncing off of the spinal cord. It doesn't actually even go clear up into their brain. And then they start losing these reflexes as it continues. So the moral reflex, if you startle a baby, they're going to put their arms wide, spread their fingers, and then try and grasp at things. So that is also known as the startle reflex. You have palmar grasp. When you put anything in a neonate's hand against their palm, they're going to hold on to it. So parents always get that aw moment when their baby holds onto their finger. Baby's not thinking about it, that just happens. The rooting reflex, when something touches a baby's cheek, they're naturally going to turn toward it and try and suck on it. And then the sucking reflex, whenever you start touching a baby's lips, they're naturally going to start sucking. The fontanelles. Now, we said that the skull is relatively flexible because it's not fused together. And here's a picture so you can see all of the different bones. In between those, there are soft spots, and that's what we call the fontanelles. There's several different ones, and they all close at different times. So the posterior fontanelle that you can see there in the back, it closes by about 3 months. The anterior fontanelle stays open much longer than the rest of them. It's also the biggest of them. And it fuses between 9 and 18 months of age. Kind of depends on what's going on there. You can tell a lot about an infant's status based on their fontanelles. If their fontanelles are bulging out, then they probably have increased pressure in their head. If their fontanelle is depressed, they're probably pretty dehydrated. As far as the immune system, babies catch some of their immunity from mom. So mom is immune to this, that, or the other. She's got what's called antibodies to certain things. And that will actually transfer into baby because mom's blood circulates into baby. So they're born with some natural immunity. And then as they're nursing with mom, mom has antibodies in her breast milk, and then they end up getting that there. It's actually pretty interesting that if an infant gets sick while breastfeeding, mom's milk will change in order to help that baby fight off that infection or that cold. So it's pretty interesting how that works. Psychosocial changes begin at birth and then they just keep going. I mean, there's really no difference, but there are things called milestones that kids try to hit. The picture is up here on your screen, table 7.2. You can find that in your book as well. But at these different ages, we expect a normally developing baby to be able to hit these milestones. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. We'll continue on in the next one.